This story is about a Xelari doctor who simply wanted to understand why humans bleed so easily, but ended up witnessing something no training could prepare him for. During a high-risk hostage rescue, a human operative takes a plasma shard to the gut, then does the unthinkable. Lieutenant Marcus Hale pressed himself flat against the shattered wall of the hostage compound. Sparks from laser fire danced around him, each crack a heartbeat in the chaotic symphony of war. Across the courtyard, a Xelari doctor, tall, slender, with iridescent skin that shimmered under emergency lights, watched warily. Dr. Zayreen had been assigned to the extraction mission to study human physiology under stress. He'd asked one simple question earlier: why do humans bleed so easily? Now, he was about to witness that answer in brutal detail. "Marcus," Zayreen whispered through the comm link, voice wavering between curiosity and concern. "Your vitals indicate fluid loss at critical levels." "Doc, hold position," came the calm reply. "Hostages in sight. I'm fine." A surge of plasma fire roared past Marcus's ear. He stumbled, hand going to his right side where flames erupted across his suit. A jagged shard of alien plasma had punched through his abdominal plating, and a gout of crimson soaked through. Zayreen stared in frozen disbelief. Seeing one human bleed wasn't new, but an operative calmly bleeding out, refusing evacuation? That defied all the data points he'd memorized from human physiology logs. Marcus dropped to one knee, pain flashing like lightning. He gritted his teeth, fumbled for his medical kit strapped to his belt. The Xelari breached his tunnel vision with concern, but Marcus waved him back, eyes locked on the broken door ahead. "Cover me, Doc, and remember I heal fast." He grabbed a compact suture pistol and ripped it open to reveal surgical thread and needles. The wound gaped, arterial blood spilling like rain into mud. Marcus paused, inhaled, then pressed the first stitch into his flesh. The weapon's needles grazed nerves, eliciting a pained grunt, but he persisted. In mid-firefight, without flinching, he pulled the thread tight, knot by knot sealing his bleeding flesh. Zayreen gasped. "That violates every human safety protocol I know. At your vitals." "Doc's gotta improvise," Marcus whispered and inserted the next stitch. Explosions rocked the compound as rebel forces poured in. A laser blast ricocheted from a pillar 2 meters away, sending debris flying. Marcus ducked, thread dangling like a lifeline, spit out a curse and kept working. Time blurred. He threaded a curved needle, robots skittering in beyond the perimeter. A hostage screamed. One final stitch. He tied off and pressed a gauze patch soaked in hemostatic gel, capable of clotting blood within seconds. Secure. His face was pale, sweat and blood mingled, but the bleeding slowed to a trickle. Zayreen edged forward. "Why would you—" More plasma rounds hammered the building. Marcus lunged to his feet and leveled his rifle. "No time. We move now." Zayreen watched him pivot, aim, breathe fire in return. The Xelari doctor cataloged the scene in stunned silence. Here was a human, bleeding badly, willingly performing self-surgery amid gunfire, and still fighting. Questions screamed in the xenobiologist's mind. They advanced through corridors drenched in smoke and spent cartridges. Zayreen supported the wounded hostage a child seized during the rebellion, prompting Marcus to cover their path. A sudden sonic blast threw them off balance and sent Zayreen sprawling. His flared nostrils filled with dust as he struggled upright. He glanced at Marcus, who had doubled back, rifle ready. No hesitation, no delay, just a man with fresh stitches in his gut, standing between chaos and salvation. They reached the exit. Extraction turrets roared, light pulse arms pivoted, enemies were cut down. Suddenly, reinforcements arrived, elite coalition troops stabbing into the courtyard with disciplined precision. Marcus lowered his rifle and staggered forward. A medic grabbed his arm. Zayreen raced off the medic, eyes blazing. He needed to report what he saw. But as he moved, the medic's gloved hand slipped inside Marcus's plating and froze. "Sir," the medic said, voice low. "What the—" Marcus swallowed, face pale. We got this, Doc. He smiled weakly. Zayren stood back, heart pounding as realization hit like a warp cannon. The shades of red in Marcus's wound betrayed more than mere injury. Beneath the stitching lay something odd, a faint hum, softly pulsing under the gauze. His hand shook as he edged closer, training his gaze on the hidden implant. Marcus exhaled and looked Zayren in the eyes. Reporting in, human bleeding protocol, unexpectedly advanced. Also, he tapped his chest. Beneath was buried classified biotech biocomposite graft seeded with nanofibers, designed to heal tissue and monitor battlefield strain. Zayren blinked, swallowing a gasp. He keyed his transceiver. Command Doctor, Zayren here. Subject Hale is, he faltered. He has an internal biotech implant. Self-sutures mid-combat. Blood loss contained. Wounded operative or... The medic froze. He looked Marcus in horror. That's not an operative. That's... Serpent Squad's trauma medic, Riley Chan. The agent got killed 10 minutes ago. He took point. Zayren's mind reeled. In all his studies, he'd never considered this. A medic among warriors on front lines, treating wounds and shooting back. A human who grew up in crises so thoroughly that surgery mid-firefight didn't faze him. Nor did it faze the team. Marcus, no, Riley leaned on the medic's shoulder. He felt weak, fear threading through clenched muscles, but he held himself upright. He'd stitched himself because without that biotech he'd have died in 60 seconds, and he stitched himself because that was exactly what frontline medics did when survival demanded it. Zayren exhaled, made a note, simple, clinical, never underestimate a bleeding human. The courtyard rattled less now. Reinforcements sealed off the site. Zayren watched Riley lead the hostage child to safety, wiping his hands even as crimson stained his sleeves. He realized he'd come expecting cultural curiosity. Instead, he'd uncovered human defiance, fragile, bleeding, indomitable, woven with tech that walked the line between biology and machine. Later, aboard the Coalition command ship, Zayren locked himself in the observation suite. He watched medic Riley Chan with fascination. He cataloged his bleeding curve, his stitchwork, the hum of that hidden graft. It didn't heal immediately. Recovery would take days, maybe weeks. But the human was already pacing the bay, restless, insisting on returning to duty. The Xelari's log entry hovered on screen. Subject, medical anomaly. Operative was trauma medic. Observation, extreme wound self-care under fire. Implant hides behind self-sutures. Lesson, never underestimate a bleeding human. He saved the note, sealed it, and braced himself for the questions from his colleagues, because this file was about to change everything. 12 hours after the extraction, the medical bay aboard the Coalition vessel Halberd Rising buzzed with quiet urgency. The air hummed with biomonitors and low conversation. Riley Chan lay propped against a reclined support frame, saline drip feeding into his left arm, his right strapped with pressure sensors that occasionally blinked in protest. His uniform, shredded and soaked with dried blood, had been peeled off hours ago. What remained was bruised skin, swollen tissue, and a line of stitches that pulsed faintly beneath transparent dressing. Zayren stood nearby, hunched over the diagnostic array. He hadn't slept. The terminal projected cross-sections of Riley's abdomen, showcasing the biotech implant embedded in his flank, something not listed in any medical dossier. It was sleek, organic in design, almost like cartilage woven with steel thread, and impossibly complex for something allegedly field-deployed. The Xelari doctor had spent the past hours in a whirlwind of silence, communicating only when pressed. His field log now had over 60 entries, half of them flagged for reclassification. As a scientist, he knew protocol, but as an observer, no witness, he felt that protocol hadn't prepared him for what he saw. Vitals stable, he muttered, scanning Riley's outputs. Wound integrity acceptable. Recovery within predictable range for a Class 2 abdominal puncture. 3, Riley corrected, voice raspy. Zarin blinked. You dispute the severity classification? Riley shifted, grimacing as the movement tugged his wound. Tore muscle and skimmed the colon. That's a class 3. Protocol's just optimistic, so soldiers won't panic. Zarin tilted his head, making a note. And yet you proceeded with self-suturing, unaided under heavy fire. You dismissed assistance even from myself. That act contradicts standard operating procedures. Riley didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted to the ceiling panels, lips pressed thin. Finally, he said, You weren't trained for field trauma. I was. Didn't make sense to waste time teaching you how to stop a bleed while we were getting shot at. The simplicity of the statement was what unsettled Zarin. The way Riley described near-death surgery. The way a Xelari might describe adjusting a thermostat. But you're not a combat specialist, Zarin said. You're listed as support medical personnel, not ranked for tactical decision-making. Riley looked at him now, tired but sharp. And you're a xenobiologist, not a soldier. But you stepped into that courtyard and carried a bleeding kid through plasma fire. He let the point sit. We both did what we had to. Zarin's internal systems logged the statement as unclassifiable behavior under combat logic. As the hours passed, Coalition officers cycled through the med bay. Some saluted Riley, others asked for specifics on the biotech. He deflected each inquiry with practiced ease. It's part of a trial program, he'd say, built for field medics operating alone. Not much to say beyond that. But Zarin knew better. The implant, classified or not, was older than Riley claimed. The tissue around it had adapted months ago. This wasn't new tech. It was something else. And it was hidden for a reason. By the second day, Riley could stand with assistance. He wore a reinforced compression wrap and moved with a slight stoop, favoring his right side. Zarin accompanied him to the observation deck, where filtered starlight shimmered against alloy floors. Riley leaned on the railing. I read your file, Zarin said. Riley didn't answer. It says you were drafted as a trauma specialist at 24. 3 deployments, the usual pattern. But there's a footnote buried in an older transmission says you were presumed dead 2 years ago. Killed in a shuttle explosion. Riley turned, meeting the Xelari's gaze. Then I must be a ghost. You're not listed in any current Coalition roster. No medical personnel should be carrying that implant. Riley's face hardened. You planning to report me? Zarin hesitated, then replied, I already did. I submitted a partial file after the extraction. Then you'll get a memo soon telling you to forget you ever saw me. Zarin narrowed his eyes. Why are you on this ship, Riley? Riley looked down at the floor, hands clasped behind his back. Because the agent assigned to that hostage op died too fast. I was the only one in his convoy who could improvise the insertion protocol. I patched the kid's father up 3 days ago, so I knew where she might be. They needed someone to walk in without triggering biometric alarms. My vitals matched close enough. Zarin reeled. They sent a medic into hostile territory alone. Riley nodded once. Wouldn't be the first time. Zarin's vocal sac contracted. That is not a logical command structure. No, Riley agreed. It's a human one. They stood in silence for a moment. Outside, a debris field floated silently past the hull, remnants of a failed blockade. Back in the med bay, Zarin uploaded his report to the High Coalition Medical Directorate. He revised several sections. He noted the following. Subject: Human Trauma Specialist Riley Chan. Behavioral anomalies. Self-operation in combat. Concealment of classified biotech. Execution of solo tactical operation despite non-combat designation. Recovery projection, 8 to 10 days with physical therapy, based on abdominal trauma involving muscle and organ disruption. Recommendation, further study required. Advisory. Human combat medics display convergence between roles, combatant, surgeon, diplomat. Do not assume operational limitations based on title. He paused, then added, Statement previously made was an oversimplification. Revised note: never underestimate a bleeding human, especially one who chooses to bleed for someone else. He pressed send. By the fourth day, Riley was walking the halls unassisted, though slower than before. He moved like a man counting every breath, ribs still sore, internal tissue still re-knitting. But he didn't stop moving. Zirin found him at the docking bay, staring at a transport vessel prepping for departure. "You leaving?" the doctor asked. Riley turned slightly. "Another hot zone, more injuries coming in than they can handle. Guess they need someone who's hard to kill." "You are not hard to kill," Zirin said flatly. "You're just hard to stop." Riley smiled, wincing as the motion tugged his side. "Close enough." Zirin approached him, offering a sealed data chip. "Your medical file. Cleaned. No implant reference. Coalition Command didn't want a public inquiry." Riley took it with a nod. "Appreciate that." Zirin hesitated. "I have one final question. The implant, it's not regulation. Why you?" Riley glanced back at the ship. "Because they knew I'd say yes, even when I shouldn't." And with that, he boarded the transport. Zirin remained at the bay doors long after it left, unsure whether what he had witnessed was bravery or recklessness, or if the distinction mattered to humans at all. 8 days after Riley Chan disappeared aboard the outbound transport, Dr. Zirin found himself standing in a temporary medical encampment on Grana 6, a dust-choked moon still smoldering from civil upheaval. The air was thin, dry, filled with static from broken shielding grids. His assignment had shifted. Frontline observation of human-alien medical interoperability under combat strain. What Command didn't tell him was that Grana 6 was barely holding. The clinic was a collection of reinforced tents and fold-out surgical slabs. Human medics moved with sharp efficiency, shouting through filtered masks as they treated civilians and soldiers alike. Zirin had reviewed the briefings. Injuries here ranged from chemical burns to fragmentation wounds. Limited supplies, minimal staff. He entered the field triage tent and froze. At the center, sleeves rolled up, compression brace half visible beneath his shirt, stood Riley Chan. The medic was bent over a Granin child, skin blistered from exposure to power conduit arcs. Riley's hands moved quickly, sterilizing, injecting analgesics, dressing the burns with bandage foam and plastisheets. There was a blood stain on his shoulder, not his own, and his face looked grayer than Zirin remembered. "You never filed departure clearance," Zirin said quietly. Riley didn't look up. "Didn't know I needed one. You still following me?" "I was reassigned. This moon wasn't supposed to be active conflict." Riley straightened, finally looking at him. "Conflict has a way of arriving uninvited." He gestured for an assistant to take over and stepped aside, wiping his hands on a towel already soaked crimson. Zirin watched him closely. "Your wound hasn't fully closed. The implant is compensating, but I can read subtle tissue inflammation. You're overexerting." "No choice," Riley said, voice flat. Zirin followed him to a nearby supply tent, where Riley began preparing more syringes, checking wound sealant canisters and recharging field defibrillators. The tent lights flickered with every energy surge from the generators. "How many hours have you slept?" Zirin asked. Riley paused. "Does it matter?" "You're operating at degraded capacity." Riley loaded another canister. "So's everyone else here." Zirin set his scanner on the table. "Why were you sent here?" Riley tapped a sealed container. "Because I've already seen these wounds before. Same resistance group, same IED patterns. I know how to spot what others miss." "But you're not." "A soldier?" Riley interrupted. "No, but this isn't a war where you can sit on the sidelines. Not if you know what's coming." That night, a call came in from a perimeter patrol. Ambushed, 4 wounded, 1 critical, en route via hover stretcher. Riley and Zirin met them at the tent entrance. The first casualty was a human soldier, half conscious, his chest armor shattered, blood foamed at the edges of his mouth. Lung puncture. Zirin moved to assist, but Riley was already there, knees in the dirt, slicing open the chest plate. Need a decompression kit, Riley barked. Zarin handed it over, fingers steady, even as his mind recoiled from the injury's severity. Riley plunged the needle into the second intercostal space. A hiss of air escaped. The soldier exhaled sharply, then passed out. They worked for 3 hours. Blood, fluid, cracked bones. Riley's side throbbed by the minute, but he never stopped. Zarin noted the way his left leg dragged slightly after every kneel, another sign of overcompensation from earlier trauma. By sunrise, Riley sat on the dirt floor, back against a stretcher crate, head tipped back. "You're worsening your condition," Zarin said. Riley chuckled, voice dry. "Probably." Zarin crouched beside him. "There are others. Let them carry the load." "There were 6 medics when I arrived," Riley said. 3 left. 1's dead. That leaves me and the kid who fainted yesterday. "Then leave. You're not fit to serve." Riley looked at him, a quiet fire in his eyes. "Z, I'm not here because I think I can save everyone. I'm here because if I don't show up, somebody might die alone. Scared. I don't need to win. I just need to hold the line a little longer." Zarin stared at him in silence, then said, "You stitched yourself closed with enemy fire overhead. That implant is just hardware. But this," he pointed to Riley's chest, "this is the real anomaly." 2 days later, the main medical station collapsed under an artillery barrage. Zarin barely escaped with 2 triage drones and a rucksack of instruments. He found Riley 4 kilometers south, already establishing a new aid point in a derelict comms array. "Where did you find this place?" Zarin asked, hauling crates from the evac skiff. "Used to be a relay tower. Shielded walls, half-decent roof. We can hold here." The days blurred. One afternoon, as Riley worked on a wounded Grenan militia fighter, Zarin caught him pausing mid-suture, hand trembling. "Stop," the Xelari said firmly. Riley looked at him, sweat glistening along his brow. "You've torn the muscle layer again. The implant can't keep sealing what you keep reopening." Riley sat back, pain etched into his face. "We don't have time." "You are no use dead," Zarin snapped. "You want to hold the line, then survive it first." It took 4 more arguments before Riley agreed to lie down. Zarin administered a mild sedative, enough to numb pain without knocking him unconscious. The medic's body bore layers of abuse, healing wounds, sprains, fatigue fractures from favoring his left leg. His body was a battlefield unto itself. While Zarin cleaned the stitches and scanned the implant, he paused. "Why do humans do this?" he asked softly. Riley's voice was slow with exhaustion. "Because someone has to." "That's not an answer." Riley opened his eyes. "You want a scientific explanation?" Zarin nodded. "We're not strong, not fast, not bulletproof. So we learn to be stubborn, and when things fall apart, someone steps up. Not because they want to, because they're the last one left." Zarin felt a strange ache in his chest, a kind of grief he couldn't quantify. That night, he updated his report. Addendum to entry. Human field medic Riley Chan is exhibiting advanced symptoms of internal degradation due to overexertion. Implant limits reached. Recommend extraction. However, subject refuses evacuation unless replacement medical staff arrive. Moral resilience exceeds expectations. Cultural notes. Human obligation seems rooted in perceived absence of others, rather than protocol. Proposed terminology, surrogate resilience phenomenon. He paused, then typed. Further note. If this is weakness, then I have never seen strength. The reinforcement medevac landed at dusk on the 10th day. Engines churning Grana 6's ashen soil into storms. The hull bore fresh scorch marks, proof the moon was still far from peace. But it brought with it what Riley Chan had insisted on for days. Trained medical staff, fully equipped, and enough supplies to run a proper triage center. Riley watched the new team disembark. They moved quickly, voices clipped, well-rested, and wide-eyed. Most of them were young. One had his sleeves rolled neatly, Another wore gloves that were still sterile white. Riley couldn't remember when his gloves had last been clean. He sat on the comms array steps, his side freshly redressed, a heating pack pressed to his ribs. His limbs ached with every breath. He didn't stand to greet them. Xelari sat beside him, silent at first. The sky had dimmed into violet. "Baby brought what we need," the Xelari said eventually. Xelari studied the human's face. Riley looked older than when they'd first met, but not in years, in hours, in pain. He bore the look of someone who'd stayed one shift too long, run one sprint too far. Riley finally said, "I'll go, but I want to hand over the patient logs first. And the infection protocols. A few of the wounded have weird cross-species reactions. I don't want that missed." "You're not responsible for all of them," Riley shrugged weakly. "Maybe. But I was here when no one else was." Xelari accepted that. He always had. 3 hours later, as the new team organized the site, Riley gathered his data pads and limped through the recovery tents. Patients watched him pass. Some nodded. Others smiled faintly. One Grenon child, wrapped in new bandages, pulse steady, reached out and touched his hand. Riley squeezed it briefly. In the operations tent, he handed off the last data chip to a medic who couldn't have been older than 22. She looked at him with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "You're Riley Chan?" she asked. He gave a tired smile. "Only when I'm awake." She hesitated. "The others said you stitched yourself during an active firefight and walked 5 clicks with an abdomen wound. Is that true?" He glanced at Xelari nearby, who raised a brow. Riley said, "I guess it was the only thing that made sense at the time." The young medic blinked. "How did you even think to do that?" Riley took a long breath. "Because someone had to stop the bleeding." The medevac ship lifted off an hour later. Xelari sat opposite Riley in the cabin, his field kit secured at his feet. The human reclined, hands folded across his lap. He looked calm, but his heart rate monitor revealed the deep exhaustion threaded through every part of him. Xelari broke the silence. "What will you do now?" "Rest," Riley said, "if my legs let me. And after that, back to triage. There's always another hot zone." Xelari frowned. "You can't keep doing this. Your body won't allow it." "I know." Silence again. "Riley," Xelari said, carefully, "do you know why your implant isn't documented?" Riley's gaze flicked to him. "Do you?" "I filed an internal audit request while you were asleep 3 nights ago. I traced the device architecture to an older human research project, biocompatible autonomous recovery systems. It was shut down 5 years ago, too expensive, too unpredictable." Riley nodded once. "It still works, but it shouldn't be in the field." "No," Riley agreed. "It shouldn't." Xelari leaned forward. "Did they install it because they trusted you, or because they knew you'd end up somewhere no one else would go?" Riley didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Both." The Xelari paused, back, deeply unsettled. 2 days later, Riley was officially discharged from emergency deployment duty. Coalition Command issued him a formal commendation, delivered via standard message packet. It mentioned his bravery, his sacrifice, and extraordinary resilience under fire. There was no mention of the implant. No mention of the dead agent he had replaced. No mention of the hours he spent bleeding quietly to preserve a secret he never volunteered to keep. Xelari received his own message shortly afterward. A request from the Xelari Medical Corps. Deliver a full briefing on the behavioral anomalies observed in human trauma specialists, including a breakdown of their decision-making processes under physical distress. He declined. Instead, he submitted a final field report. It was brief, unclassified. Title: Case Study Human Trauma Specialist Riley Chan. Excerpt: Species: Homo sapiens Role. Medical operative event summary. Evacuation until replacements arrived demonstrated extreme moral and physiological endurance. Survival attributed to integrated experimental biotech and intrinsic behavioral traits. Conclusion: subject's primary anomaly is not biomechanical, it is cultural. Humans display a persistent willingness to bleed for others without assurance of outcome, reward, or recognition. This behavior, while tactically inefficient, yields disproportionately high survival rates in group settings. Addendum: never underestimate a bleeding human, not for the blood they lose, but for the line they refuse to let fall. 3 weeks later, Xelari returned to his research station in orbit over Aleph 9. The corridors were quiet, clean, predictable. He taught a lecture series on cross-species triage response. He included every major species in the curriculum, but on the final day he deviated from his syllabus. He loaded a photo onto the main screen, a grainy image of Riley seated in dust and blood, cradling a patient's head with one hand while applying pressure to his own side with the other. His eyes were focused, exhausted, unbroken. This, Xelari told his students, is what it means to be a human combat medic. They will bleed, they will hurt, they will break protocol, and sometimes they will do things that do not make sense to us. He paused, then added softly, but they will not stop. As the students watched in silence, Xelari concluded, it is not the bleeding that defines them. It is the decision to keep going anyway. And in that quiet room, surrounded by the hum of projectors and the cold logic of academia, someone finally understood what war looked like through alien eyes. The story of Riley Chan, stitched together with blood and duty, had ended, but the message remained. Never underestimate a bleeding human.